Welcome to Indie Beacon Radio, where creative souls can find help in marketing their creations. You can send questions for each show on Twitter using the hashtag IndieBeacon. Now sit back and enjoy learning about our guest for this show.
I am your host, B. Alan Bourgeois, and welcome to today's episode of Indie Beacon Radio. And we have Marian Hays with us, who's written some books about diabetes. Welcome, Marian.
Thank you. I am so delighted to be here.
Well, you definitely have written on a subject matter that is very important to a lot of people in the United States. So let's start with the basics. You are not one who has diabetes, but your husband is, and
Yes.
That's how you got into it. So tell me how that all happened.
Well, my husband went for what we thought was a basic checkup, and the doctor suggested that he also go see a heart doctor for a little checkup there, series of tests, and within a week, he had been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes and wound up in the hospital having 4 heart stents placed, and that was probably because he had undiagnosed diabetes for a period of time. But with that, we had a handful of prescriptions and a diagnosis that neither one of us liked very much. So I started researching about how we could reverse the diabetes naturally. And in the course of that, he followed what I was discovering and teaching, and the doctor took him off the most dangerous drug. And basically, he said, I really needed to write a book to share with other people. So that's where the first book came from, Diabetes Diet Options, What to Eat, When to Eat, and How to Regain Your Health. So I shared with people the basics of it. It's been called a quick study guide, and we went from there with that particular book.
So before we go too much further, diabetes has 2 classifications, type 1 and type 2. Your husband was type 2.
Correct.
So help people understand the difference between the 2.
All right. First of all, there's multiple things. There's, first of all, prediabetes. And there are 86 million people that have prediabetes without even, a lot of them don't even know it. And they've got elevated blood sugar, and they're at risk of becoming type 2. Type 2 and prediabetes are lifestyle diseases. People think that they're a disease that they have no control over, but they do. Type 1 is a pancreatic issue and is the one that requires insulin, and that's an entire different class. What we're dealing with here is prediabetes and type 2 diabetes, which can be controlled through lifestyle.
Okay, so that's a lot of information and sounds a little confusing. But so we'll try to stay with the type 2 and the pre-diabetes, because that kind of makes a little sense. Being able to set your diet and being able to help alter the process is a good start. And so diet is the key. So how did you learn, because your background is you're not a dietitian. So how did you learn how to do this and thus create the book?
I went out researching. I wanted to find out as much as I could. The more I researched, I discovered that it is a lifestyle disease, and through proper eating and health and exercise, that it could be not only controlled, but actually reversed. And that is what has happened with my husband's case.
Now, you have mentioned not only in conversations, but in other forms, that a lot of people think they're doing the right thing with their diet, but fail. Help me understand how that happens.
Well, there are different combinations of things. People don't understand what is going on within their body with what they eat. And if we had an X-ray where we could actually see what's going on, it might make it easier, but it's not. We need to eat foods like proteins and the fruits and vegetables that are healthy for us, because that's what builds our body up rather than tears it down. When we eat too much food, non fiber carbs, for example, gets turned to glucose immediately. The sugary foods get turned to glucose. And that's the process. And I explain that in the book too, that the process is as the foods are turned into glucose or blood sugar, they are sent to the cells. That becomes the energy that we live on. But the cells are so saturated that they won't allow the insulin, which is the key to opening the cells for the glucose, to add more. So then what we have is our body is defending itself, and so it takes that glucose out of the blood and turns it to fat. So now we have fat building up.
So that's where then a lot of people have the preconception that if you're overweight, your chances of having diabetes is greater, but it's not always the case, is it?
It's not always the case. Yes, there is that chance that because you're overweight, you could, but it depends on how you're eating and so forth. It's always better not to be overweight, and people who have diabetes diagnoses get their weight under control. That's when they see that the diabetes condition is reversing. And the biggest problem is when this is happening with the glucose being converted to fat, you have belly fat. You have, which is called visceral fat. It's the fat that they store on your organs. It's on your heart, it's on your liver, it's all over on the inside of you, and that's the fat that we want to melt off first.
And it's also the hardest fat to melt off.
Yes, it is. But when we do it right with the right types of foods, it can be done, and it's a matter of it takes time, and it takes the desire and willingness to do it.
So for a lot of people, I'm sure the desire comes from, as you mentioned, you went home from the hospital with a bag full of medicine. I mean, that alone could be a good deterrent, versus eating healthy and, the occasional exercise and stuff. I mean, that's a big difference.
It's a wake-up call. And my husband said, well, first of all, I want to say thanks for not saying I told you so, because I had been encouraging him to eat well. But then the next thing was he chose to follow what I was doing, and he started learning to read labels. We went through the grocery store one time, and he's picking up one thing, looking at the label and putting it back on the shelf. And after who knows how many things, he looked at me and he said, "There's sugar in everything." And I said, yes, pretty much there is.
Yeah, especially fructose, because that seems to be a standard for a lot of products.
Right. And fructose in fruit is a good thing as long as you don't overdo it. But what the food industry is doing now is adding it to virtually everything. You've got the food industry vested in keeping you buying their products. There are research studies out there that will tell the individual food companies exactly how little sugar they have to add to a product in order to keep you addicted, because sugar is addictive.
Yes, I have a sugar addiction myself, but I'm also trying to eat as healthy as possible, so I can enjoy that sugar rush once in a while.
And there's nothing wrong with having some, but it's a matter of doing it in balance and wisely.
And life is always about balance. So
yes.
Your Diabetes Diet Options, your first book, how long did it take you to actually put that together?
It took me several months of research and 1 month to put it together as a book.
That's great. And of course, then you tested it out on you and your husband, make sure it worked right.
Oh, it was because of it working on him that he said, please write the book. So that's when the book happened.
Now, after that, you ended up with a journal. What was the reason for the journal?
The journal is very important because if you track what you're eating, you track your exercise, you track what is going on, how you feel, all the different aspects, you have an opportunity to go back and say, this has been a really good week. What am I doing? I need to keep doing that. Or this has been a not so good week. I'm not feeling good. What was different? And it may have been an office party. It may have been a holiday. Who knows what it might have been if it was off track. But it gives you an opportunity to catch it quickly and say, okay, we're going to adjust.
Now, I don't happen to use a journal, but I know exactly what you're saying as far as thinking back about that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure a journal would help process the thinking faster than
Yes.
trying to remember and constantly reminding yourself, oh, that didn't work, you got to try this and stuff. So a journal is definitely worth it.
Right, and it can keep track of your blood sugar and what's up and what's down, so you can have a better way of making sure you're doing the right thing.
Okay. Now, before we get to the third book, which is coming out soon, or actually it is out.
Just now came out.
Yeah. Tell us, really hit it home hard for people so they can think about it during the break, okay? As if they don't choose to fix this, what is the worst result that can happen to them?
Well, the absolute worst is they will die young. They will also be at risk for the side effects. I've got a page in my book that lists multiple different things that people don't even think about that are side effects of not controlling their food and all of the other symptoms that go with diabetes. The leg amputations, they can eventually go blind. You get retinopathy and heart disease, and then you wind up with additional medications to control all of the other side effects, and the expense of it is large, but the emotional impact that it has on an individual as well as the individual's family can be devastating.
Yes, I'm glad you said it, because I was hoping you would, because it is not just that person who's affected, but everybody around them and stuff, especially when it does become that amputation or the blindness or other things. I mean, just going through the aspect of having to have your blood cleaned 2-3 times a week can be immense, or having to have your liver replaced or kidney replaced, or all these different things that add up. So it's very costly in that respect. So eating healthy may not be cheap, but in the long run, it's a lot cheaper
It's a lot cheaper than the alternative. And one of the things that the doctors will tell you is the medications that they give you for diabetes will eventually exacerbate heart problems and other things. And as my husband's doctor told him in the beginning, well, I'm going to give you this medication, but in 5 years, it'll probably wear out your pancreas. Well, then what?
Yeah. And how long ago did your husband start the process?
9 years ago.
And he's lost roughly how much weight?
His A1C when he first started was in the dangerous zone of 9.5, and he has steadily reduced it to the point he's now 0.2% from normal. He is not diabetic type 2 anymore. He is pre-diabetic, but he's right there on that edge. We expect the next visit, they're going to say, okay, now you're in the normal zone.
Great. And as far as his lifestyle has changed, is he feeling more energetic or frisky?
It's more, sure, more energetic. He's much more hopeful, and we're doing things. He takes things, I want to say more seriously, but it's more seriously in a positive way, that he knows. We worked very hard at completely changing the way we ate, not in a rigid way, but to choose the healthy foods, the proteins and the vegetables and fruits, and cut back on carbs and things like that. And it has just become a natural thing. It's not a forced thing at all. It's just a natural way of eating.
Right. And with that, we're going to stop and take a break, and we'll come back and we'll talk about overcome diabetes and some other issues and stuff. And we'll be back.
Thank you.
Indie Lecture is a store for serious readers and indie authors. Find great talent at indielector.store and save money on books with their book club. A portion of the proceeds helps get books into schools and libraries in need. Find a great book to read by an indie author at indielector.store.
My Dream America, written by Helen Monday. A story of hopes and dreams and struggles and strengths of a young girl who wanted to come to America at age 13, came to America at age 21 with a suitcase and a guitar, a ticket for a year and a visa for 3 months, became a United States citizen at age 28. My Dream America can be purchased at Barnes & Nobles and Amazon, written by Helen Monday.
Welcome back to Indie Beacon Radio. Don't forget to like us, follow us, or subscribe to one of our many channels. Now, here is your host for today's show.
Welcome back. This is Beyond Bourgeois. I'm your host for today's show of Indie Beacon Radio. And we have with us Marian Hays, who's written several books about diabetes. She's not diabetic herself. Her husband is currently pre and was level 2, but now is getting closer to being normal. You wrote the third book, which is Overcome Diabetes. What is that about?
As I was watching and observing other people, friends that said, oh yeah, I'm a diabetic type 2 as well, and they had no hope. They just were accepting the fact that they had diabetes and it was going to continue to deteriorate their health. And as I talked with them and did more research on it, I realized that people may know what to do, but they just don't seem to do it. And so I went on a new quest to find out really what was stopping people from doing the right things. As it turns out, what stops people from getting healthy is pretty much things that stop people from not accomplishing a lot of things. Bad habits, the lack of willpower, they get triggered by something and wind up just going right back into old habits. But then I also discovered those things we can pretty much regulate ourselves through choices. But then there's another insidious factor, and that's sabotage. The food industry and the drug industry are vested in profits, not your health. And the food industry, there is a research company in Pennsylvania that has a $17 billion a year budget, partially funded by grants and the other part by the food industry. And so they're a little beholden to the food industry. And that's where they're learning how little sugar they can add to the foods. Fruit Loops is a candy. It is not a cereal. And you get into those little games that they're playing. Years ago, when the government decided that fat was the big no-no and everything, the reason that people were fat was because they were eating fat, and so they had to take fat out of everything. Well, when the food industry takes fat out of a product, it tastes terrible, so they started adding sugar. So now you've got the pendulum swinging the other way. And then when sugar becomes the enemy, which it is because it is addictive, then they start coming up with all these other chemical substitutes, that some of which are carcinogenic. And so there's negative sides to all of that. And the whole game is they want to sell more product. It isn't let's really do healthy. Only recently, when there's been a much more push on health, has organic foods happened. You've got the GMO, and that's doing who knows what damage on a continuous basis everywhere. Even products that may be raised GMO or grown GMO, if they're next to a farm that is using the overspray and so forth, it's going to filter in. So it makes it very difficult to control that way. Then you've got pharma. They are very definitely interested in keeping you not healthy. If you're not buying their drugs because you're healthy, their profits go down. So they have huge lobbies with the government to keep their profits up. and they are very slow at bringing out drugs that can truly cure versus maintain. So they're real good at maintaining, and they bring these drugs to the doctors and say, these are the ones that we need to be distributing. And the doctors mean well. There's absolutely no malice, that I believe, with the doctors, but in their training over the years, they've got a very small period of training time on finding the source and reversing it. They are very great at diagnosing what it is and doing something to mitigate it or maintain it or keep you happier or whatever the case may be. But the idea of actually going out and treating the source rather than the symptoms is much less. There are more and more integrative doctors that work to be synergistic with the patient, but the insurance companies aren't paying for that. So a lot of people that want to do the integrative health are having to do it out of pocket. So it's kind of an issue where if you really want to get healthy, you have to take it on yourself and choose that I want to be healthy. There are ways to do it. I address it in the book. There are ways that we need to be aware of. If you're aware of all the sabotage and the different things that are happening, it gives you an opportunity to work around that.
Okay. Now, out of curiosity, is, because of everything you just said, is American and or Western civilization more prone to this versus, say, like the Middle East or somewhere that's not in that group?
Very much so. It started as an epidemic in the Western culture. Unfortunately, over the years, it has now become a pandemic. So it has spread pretty much throughout the world. But the Western culture is much more inclined to it. In the European countries, they have a much higher rise of diabetes than they did in the past. So it's a pandemic, and it's tied to overweight. That's kind of if you look at the numbers for increased overweight and you look at the numbers for increased diabetes, they're parallel.
Now, realizing you're not a doctor, through the research you've done, as far as exercise goes, is there at least a minimum for most people to be doing exercise per week to help keep diabetes in control or at least reduce?
The exercise is important, but most people who really need it or are excessively overweight, they're the ones that shy away from it the most. And so the way I would like people to look at it is it's not exercise, like go to the gym. It's more, think of it as movement. And there's yoga, there's Tai Chi, there's simple things, but take a walk around the block. Keep moving. That's going to help. There are some people who the best they can do to start with is put their tennis shoes on today and say, wow, I did that. Tomorrow I'll actually go outside. And that's what they need to do. And if all they can do is walk to the mailbox and back, that's good. Just do that and increase what you can do. You have to add that, though, with what types of foods you need to cut out.
Right. Going and doing exercise is pointless if you're going to be sitting at home eating a bag of chips and stuff.
Exactly. And the other thing that we touch on in the book is the willpower and the triggers. Everybody thinks, well, I don't have enough willpower to keep up a diet. Well, every morning we wake up with the same amount of willpower that we had the day before. It's just a matter of how many decisions that we make, and we wear ourselves out in that. And by the time you get home from work in the evening, you've pretty much got decision fatigue, and all you want is, let me see, the chips and the TV remote, and you're done for the evening. So if you pre-plan how you want to eat and spend your day, then that's one less decision that you have to make.
Now, in doing your Overcome Diabetes book, and the fact that your husband is getting to that point of being what's considered normal range, have you found other things or other issues for, okay, he's gotten healthy, he's gone off the medication, but how do we keep him going, or is he going to fall back? Have you seen other people and related to that?
There are moments and times over the holidays, for example, I can say, all right, let's eat clean, pure, whatever over the holidays, and sometimes he'll say, you know what, it's the holidays, right afterwards I'm going to really jump in and get back at it. But even so, when he does it, we're talking about going out and having a meal in a restaurant, and he still chooses the chicken and the turkey because that's what he prefers now. Or he eats the right things. He may have, there are times when he'll say, can I have a margarita? And I'm like, no, not now. And every once in a while, it's like, okay, you can have one. So, I mean, it's not like, and I say that because we assumed the role. He said, I can be the food police, but I'm a good cop.
That's good.
So he'll check with me, but he still does chips now and then, but it's just now and then.
So actually, you just said the word good cop, food cop, and a good one at that. So that actually makes me wonder, are you going to write a book to help spouses become that food cop?
He is encouraging me to do that. I have some pages in the book for non-diabetics who love diabetics, because it's real important for them to understand what the diabetic is going through and what they're facing and how to approach helping the diabetic. I could want it more for him than he does, and no amount of my pushing him will actually accomplish anything. I have to be willing to say, look, here's the, you can do this and be healthy, or you can do this and die. And he's going, okay, health, die, okay, I'll choose health. But he chose it, and he chose to follow that. And other people do the same. If they choose it for themselves, they'll follow on. But if they're doing it just because their spouse is nagging them, or the kids are, it may work for a while, but there's going to be moments when they'll get discouraged and they're just going to say, oh, blow it off. And then it gets worse. So I'm looking at doing a caregiver book next.
Okay, and that brings up a question which I'm going to save for after this last break, and we'll be right back.
Okay.
What would you do if you found out everyone on the town council were thieves and murderers? That's what happened in Bandera, Texas in 1873. John Cruder was the marshal, yet he needed to operate outside the law in order to balance the scales of justice. He is the Midnight Marauder. You can find his books on Amazon.com and TopWesterns.com in paperback, digital, and audio. I'm Roy Clinton, and I hope you'll read The Midnight Marauder.
Love to read? Love to meet authors in person? Then check out bookfestival.network to find a book festival in your region of Texas. We are adding book festival events throughout the year, so sign up to get notices and even a coupon towards purchase of a Texas author's book. Sign up at bookfestival.network.
The Holy Spirit is gifting our children and grandchildren, and they are naturally able to show God's power to the world. Amazon bestseller Anne Lynn Noble and her granddaughter Carlisle capture insights and learnings of growing spiritually through the pages of Glow and Grow in the Grace of God. This inspirational novel provides perspectives on biblical truth from a young believer and her grandmother exploring spirituality.
And we're back. This is your host, B. Alan Bourgeois. We have with us Marian Hays, who has written 3 books about diabetes and overcoming and the diets and all that fun stuff. And we were just talking about spouses. The good cop, food cop, as Marian is for her husband. But I'm curious, are there a lot of families that have not only one person with diabetes, 1 or 2 or pre, but also a second spouse that has that?
Yes, you find that one of the myths that people believe is that it's genetic. It's not. There is no diabetes gene, but there's bad habits that run through families. And so if the family is used to eating all fried foods and lots of desserts and so forth, and eventually, grandma's got diabetes, and then the kids get it and the grandkids get it, it can go down generations, and that makes them assume that, oh, it runs in the family, I'm going to get it too. But instead, it's a lifestyle habit. So when you have multiple people in the family with diabetes, then it helps if, for whomever will get on board with it, that they're the ones that will improve. But they can draw a line in the sand and put good habits down for the rest of the generations. I have a reader who recently told me that she's not diabetic, but she bought the book because she wants to help the family members. She says, I've got several family members who are diabetics, and I want to know what it is and how I can help them. And she's already doing that. So they're beginning to see for the first time what the realities are.
And in your book, Overcome Diabetes, is there by chance a section in there that talks about that spouse aspect of two people, a married couple have diabetes, and one wants to make the change, but the other doesn't? How does that overcome that aspect? Do you talk about that?
Yeah, I do. It's challenging if you're the diabetic and you want to go to a healthy lifestyle and you have a partner that's not on board. Then it's really let's have a meeting, let's discuss this, let's look at the options, and hopefully the person that wants to do it more, that really wants to do the health, can share with the other person enough information for them to say, okay, I'll be on board with you. And even if they're not, sometimes you've got a divided pantry. It would be wonderful if you could go through, clean out everything in the pantry that's going to be a temptation. But sometimes you just have to label some things and say, these are the healthy foods. I'm going to go here, and I don't want to be difficult, but I have to do what's right for my health.
A quick question in reference to who gets diabetes more than others. You've talked about the fact of how the pharmacy and how the food industry is trying to keep you addicted to their foods. So doesn't that apply more for those people who have lower income that maybe cannot afford healthier foods?
It might, but it really isn't, because there are some very upper middle class people, some others. It depends on what their food habits are, what their lifestyle habits are. And it really doesn't matter as income totally, but yes, on the lower income, spaghetti and fried foods and things like that may be easier to get. Lots of white bread, let's all have sandwiches, and they're not paying attention. It's more of an education thing. If those people are more educated and can realize that they have to cut out the things that are harming them, then they can adjust and go from there.
Good. So we've got just a couple minutes left. Please let people know where they can find the books, how they can reach out to you, all that fun stuff.
The books can be had at Amazon. You can search for them by the titles or by my name. And I also have a blog site called healthandempowerment.com, where they can go and connect with me on that blog site.
Wonderful. Well, I thank you very much for your time. You had a lot of great information. Hopefully somebody will watch it and learn something from it. So we appreciate it.
I thank you very much.
Thank you. You have a good day.
You too.
Thank you for listening to Indie Beacon Radio, where creative souls can find help in marketing their creations. To learn more about Indie Beacon services, to be a guest on the show, or to advertise on our show, please visit our website at indiebeacon.com.